The FBI called him the most prolific serial killer in American history. Not suspected, not alleged, confirmed. With 93 confessions, each one detailed enough that investigators could match it to a real case, a real victim, a real life that ended and went unnoticed for years. Some of those victims had been sitting in cold case files since the 1970s. Nobody connected them, nobody looked, until they did. And here's the part that should keep you awake at night. The question that runs underneath every single one of those 93 cases. Samuel Little was not hiding. He was arrested dozens of times over several decades, for assault, for theft, for drug offenses. He passed through the American justice system like water through a sieve. So why did it take until he was in his 70s for the full picture to emerge? What did the system miss? And how many names are still waiting to be found? Samuel Little was born in Reynolds, Georgia in June of 1940. By the time he was a teenager, he had already begun accumulating an arrest record. Over the following decades, he drifted across the United States, California, Texas, Florida, Mississippi, Ohio, dozens of cities, dozens of arrests, and dozens of women who disappeared. His method was deliberate. He targeted women who existed on the margins of society, women struggling with addiction, women involved in sex work, women whose disappearances were less likely to trigger an immediate investigation. He understood, with a cold and calculated clarity, that some lives draw less attention than others. He used that knowledge as a weapon. He killed with his hands. No firearms, no elaborate tools. His physical strength was exceptional, and he knew how to make a death look like an overdose or an accident. Medical examiners in multiple states ruled his victims' deaths as natural causes or undetermined. That single fact allowed him to move freely for nearly 40 years. This is where the case breaks open. In 2012, Little was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky, on a narcotics charge. A routine DNA sample was taken. That sample matched evidence from 3 unsolved murders in Los Angeles County from the 1980s. He was extradited to California, tried, and in 2014 convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. But the FBI was not finished. In 2018, agents from the Bureau's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program sat down with Little in a Texas prison. What followed was one of the most extraordinary confessions in the history of American law enforcement. Over a series of interviews, Little described 93 murders spanning from 1970 to 2005. He provided locations, descriptions, details that only someone present could know. He even sketched portraits of his victims from memory, women whose names he sometimes never knew. The FBI announced in 2019 that they had verified the credibility of all 93 confessions. Investigators across more than a dozen states began reopening cold cases, attempting to match Little's accounts to unidentified remains and forgotten files. As of his death in prison in December of 2020, investigators had formally confirmed a significant number of those cases. With the work of matching his accounts to cold case files and unidentified remains still ongoing across multiple states. Identities for some victims have since been established. Others remain unknown. Gone. Without a name. Without a case number. Without anyone to call the next of kin. That detail changes everything when you consider the scale of what was missed. 93 is not a number that emerges from nowhere. It is the result of a system that consistently undervalued certain lives. Medical examiners who lacked resources, police departments that did not share information across jurisdictions, a culture in law enforcement that, for too long, placed less urgency on cases involving victims already living at society's edge. Little himself acknowledged this. In his interviews with the FBI, he stated plainly that he believed no one would come looking. For nearly 4 decades, he was right. Remember what I said at the start, 93 confirmed confessions, and the system had touched this man dozens of times before anyone connected the pattern. Samuel Little died in prison. The confessions are on record, the FBI case files are open, but not every victim has been identified. Families in some of those cases still do not know what happened to the person they lost. And so the question that remains, the one that sits at the center of this entire case, is not about Samuel Little at all. It is about the victims still without names. Somewhere in an archive, in a cold case box, in a database of unidentified remains, there are women whose stories match his words. How many of them are still waiting to be found?